Yes, guys, and welcome back to the Cannon podcast. I hope you are all doing well. Hope you are all good. Very exciting times, certainly from our perspective. We've just recorded a 45/50 minute pod, our first pod, which is based around data. And this is something that is going to be regular within the Cannon podcast now, and we've recorded just very recently and looked at some very interesting metrics. And it's something that is going to be happening every single month towards the end of the month. And as we are, well, all the data nerds will know, we want to be able to get our teeth stuck into large sample sizes of data. And that's why I think right now is a good time to start with it, because with 9 games into the season, it's still not a massive sample size, but it's something that we can absolutely look into and apply context. And this is something that we're really excited to do on a regular basis. And we want you guys to be giving your inputs, your thoughts and opinions on things that you want us to see in the future pods. What we want to make this. We want to make this very interactive with the audience, where we're going to keep certain metrics very consistent, where we can kind of build a story of Arsenal's season. But at the same time, we want to be able to explore other relationships that we may not have considered initially. So yeah, we're really excited by this. And you can check out our first pod via the Patreon. The link is in the description below. You can access a free trial and see if you kind of enjoy this sort of content. If you do, great. If you don't, then that's also fine. And we just hope that you guys can really give your inputs into this, because, like we said, we want to make this very exciting, and we want to get our teeth stuck into a lot of different metrics. And joining me on a regular basis, and I'm really excited by this, is the wonderful, the intelligent, highly intelligent, the great diehard Arsenal fan, George. Another George. Welcome, George.
Yeah, another George. You're too kind. George 2.0. Yeah, it's great to be involved. And I really enjoyed the longer episode we just recorded. And this is, I've been a fan of the podcast in its various forms for a while. But also, I had data as really as a passion project of mine, and I shared a few sort of interesting things or different ways to kind of package up the data with Alex. And I think there is a bit of a gap as well for maybe some more of this medium term analysis. And there's obviously so many stats around football from game to game, but actually being able to take kind of that more sort of medium term view and look at maybe some of the trends is really exciting. So great to be involved.
No, really looking forward to it. And again, we've just recorded our first pod. It was really exciting. I hope you guys enjoy that if you do access the Patreon. And like I said, you can access it via a free trial to see if you do like this sort of content. So without further ado, let's get stuck into what we're going to be presenting you guys with now. And it is looking at a head-to-head comparison with our competitors, because it's starting to get very exciting. And, it's always good to see how we're faring against our competitors in metrics that a lot of people will be familiar with. But I think it's just really good to have this sort of comparison. So let's show that now.
Perfect. Yeah. So I lost you for a second, but hopefully we're back up to speed. But so what I've built so far is just a view taking data from various different sources, maybe stuff that we all use regularly.
Yeah.
But by bringing it all into one place and also collecting it through various seasons, we're able to repackage it in a slightly different way. And as Rohan mentioned, there'll be certain views that will go through month to month. But there's obviously things that we'll deep dive into. And we thought as a nice starting point would be to compare some of the head-to-head numbers against Arsenal, using them as a base versus some of sort of our nearest competitors. So how I've outlaid this as well is just firstly showing some of the more high-level metrics. So number of games played as well as the position. I've introduced a win rate as a kind of metric, that kind of single metric across win, draw and lose, and then points per game. And I think points per game is a useful metric, particularly when the number of games played obviously doesn't match between each of the two teams. But at this stage, both teams have played 9 games. And then starting to introduce some of the underlying numbers from FBref. So looking at XG per 90, so the amount of quality, the total amount of shot quality, I suppose, over the 90 minutes, as well as the amount of shots, the quality of those shots over 90, and then just a couple of shot volume metrics around how many shots were taken and faced, and then finally some of the data points from Mark Stats that includes good sort of proxies for obviously ball control, ball using possession, but also average field tilt, which is more of a territorial control metric, which I think fans of the pod will be fully aware of. And then finally, a couple of metrics around defensive line. So looking at Arsenal v Liverpool, I've set this up where you can see quite clearly the differences between the numbers. And Rohan, was what really stood out for you when you compare sort of our season?
This is a really good way to kind of visually see how we're faring against our competitors, and you can see for audio listeners, in case you aren't able to see this, we've got effectively a column towards the left of where Arsenal sit, where the Arsenal numbers are, that is highlighting the difference between the two metrics between ourselves and Liverpool. We'll go into Man City as well in a bit as well. And red is indicating bad, in which we're not doing as good as Liverpool in, whereas green indicates good. And if we look at it, win rate, obviously we're below Liverpool there, points per 90, expected goals per 90. We're conceding more expected goals as well per 90. We're actually outdoing Liverpool in terms of shots per 90. But again, average possession, average field tilt, we're performing, poorly relative to Liverpool. But we've mentioned it many times. Well, we've mentioned it in the previous in the pod that we just recorded, in that there's a lot of context behind this. Arsenal have faced a lot of adversity so far this season. When you consider the injuries that we've had, you consider the circumstances that have arisen in game against the likes of Brighton, against Man City, against Tottenham with the injuries that we've had. And, the teams I've just kind of mentioned there, look at the caliber of teams we're facing as well. And you take into account all this context in terms of injuries and suspensions. And then most recently against Liverpool as well. We're going into that game, without William Saliba, without Martin Odegaard, without Calafiori. And then you've got an injury to Gabriel that happens in the second half that affects the flow. You've got an injury to Jurriën Timber that affects the flow, which he's fine, but he was obviously not fully fit to play the game. But that is, we needed him. And you've got Bukayo Saka who comes off as well. And these are things to consider as to why Arsenal may not be performing as good as someone like Liverpool in certain metrics. What I will say, what is interesting, is when you look at the average defensive line and you compare Arsenal to Liverpool, Arsenal are holding a higher line than Liverpool so far, which is very interesting when you consider that context as well. And then likewise, the opposition defensive line, Arsenal are facing a deeper block. They're facing a deeper line, which is suggesting that teams are a little bit more encouraged by playing a little bit more aggressively versus Liverpool. Now, it's a small difference. It's only 1 meter, but I think it's very important to consider when we've considered the context as well. But largely, we are not performing as good as Liverpool, and that is to be expected with a lot of the things that we have seen. There are things that we can do better in, but I think this context is very important. And I think against Man City as well, if we can go into the Manchester City side of things, here it doesn't read particularly great. We've got red in all aspects. But again, we've kind of already considered the context in the Liverpool comparison. For audio listeners, win rate obviously being less, average field tilt being less for Arsenal, defensive lines. We Manchester City are playing a lot more aggressively than Arsenal so far, and likewise teams are sitting off Manchester City more than Arsenal. So we're not performing as good as Man City in any of these metrics so far. But I think the context is very important. And that's where I stand on it. And the good thing about this pod is the fact that we're going to be able to build this story each month, and how Arsenal are going to improve or maybe not improve. It's something that we can kind of look into more as we increase the sample size.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think for this as well, it does obviously show how much Man City are monsters when it comes to ball possession and obviously having that in dangerous areas. I think there's obviously so much context that Rohan's brought up as well. And so I think this is, again, a good example of larger sample size. You'll start to see some of these things certainly you'd hope from Arsenal's perspective improve as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that we're going to look to share as much as possible each month. But I think the next metric we've got is a very interesting one, something that I'm actually very keen to look into because it's giving us a bigger sample size because we're taking it from the start of last season and we can kind of draw some conclusions and things that we need to be mindful of going into the next part of this season as to what we need to do to avoid things that cost us last season. So why don't you walk us through this? This
this was really good fun to put together. So I think it's based on something I think you mentioned on various times on pods as well. Is it's always inevitable that you're going to have poor results, drop points, maybe drawing even, which isn't great for the short term. But I think what's crucial is to remember to avoid clusters of bad games.
Yeah.
And I think it was the last pod where you mentioned that it wasn't that this Villa game in this towards the end of last season that killed us. It was actually the cluster around Christmas of Liverpool, West Ham at home, and Fulham, where you're getting 1 point in 9 games.
Yeah,
and I think really to kind of highlight this sort of avoiding clusters of bad games, what I've introduced or overlaid to this data is effectively a rolling 6-game point average. So what it's looking to do is just look at the sample of the last 6 games, and as you move to the next game, it's including that recent game, but then knocking off the previous the last game that was played there. And so, firstly, why 6 games? Well, I think it's enough to show maybe some of the fluctuation, but again, any smaller, or you can start to, things get really will fluctuate a lot. So 6 games at the moment feels like a really nice sample, and if I just isolate on that chart as well, you can kind of see that there was this period over Christmas where the kind of rolling 6-game average after the Liverpool, West Ham and Fulham game really went well below 1.1 there. And I guess the knock on of that is, if you trend out these average points per game over a season, well, if you average at 2 points per game over a season, you're looking at 78 points. And obviously, if you're thinking of some of the types of total points that we need to post to kind of get to that, get past the finish line, then obviously maintaining a consistent sort of average points per game is obviously an attractive thing. And I think the relevancy, I suppose, of bringing this up now is and bringing the points back briefly is, there have been some stodgy results recently with drop points and certainly the loss in Bournemouth. And I think it's important to give context that, one result is not the disaster and the end of the world and the end of the league. But again, it's avoiding those kind of clusters of bad results.
No, I think, we've mentioned, I've mentioned this many times about, I think, as fans, it's natural to feel nervous when we're competing against a juggernaut, a team, for me, that is the best team that I have seen in Premier League history, and in terms of this era of dominance from Pep Guardiola. And we have a big sample size of what they have been doing season in, season out in terms of the points that they accumulate. There is the caveat of not having Rodri for the entirety of a season now, which I think is going to cause City to drop off a lot more than what we saw in previous seasons. But if we assume that they're going to be able to maintain the pace that we kind of still expect as fans, being conservative, I'm a firm believer that, you can still have a bad day. It's normal, like at the end of the day, players are human beings. They can have days in which they're simply not at the races, and that can affect the outcome of a result. And Arteta's mentioned it many times about how Arsenal need to be this team which they can win in any context. When they're not at their best day, they still need to be able to get a win, not just a draw, but when they're not performing well, get a win. However, you can still have a bad day. But when that bad day becomes 2, 3, 4 bad days in succession, you're really, really fighting, it's a tall order. And I think, as we see here, that drop in December where, it was against Fulham, West Ham, and I'd also include Liverpool as well because it's part of that cluster. We can isolate the Liverpool result at Anfield and a draw being a good result, which it always is, especially given the performances and what we've seen Liverpool do over the years under Jurgen Klopp. But when you have that sandwiched with 2 other games which we've lost, 1 point out of 9 is not good enough. And now we're coming into territory where, forget about the context, about what's happened against Bournemouth and Liverpool. We spoke about it many times. But if we look strictly at the results at baseline, we are edging towards a 3-game cluster in which we don't win any games. And that becomes a bit more of a worry. So the Newcastle game, I think, is very important that we're able to get a win to avoid this sort of cluster happening, and to effectively stop this kind of poor period of results where, again, the context shows, for me, the Liverpool game, I think a point is a good result. But when you then have that stretched across another game, that's when we find ourselves in a bit of a problem. And I think what's interesting is what you mentioned there. If we're hitting that kind of like 2.3, I think, points per game, we're in a good position, and that's what we've got to kind of aim for.
Yeah, hopefully you didn't lose me too much there, but what I got there is I guess a 2.3. Yeah, that's on course for 85 to 90 points over a season. Which, who knows if that's actually the total points that will be the outcome. Will be what the winner gets this season.
Yeah.
But I thought this was an interesting analysis, and again, a lot rooted on what you'd mentioned around sort of clusters of bad games.
No, definitely. And again, this is something that we'll be looking to analyze again once we have more games to look into. But we kind of know where we need to be, at baseline in terms of what the number of points relative to a rolling 6-game average. So yeah, we'll finish there. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was a taster of the types of metrics that we're going to be looking into, and we're going to be looking to get ourselves stuck into so many more exciting metrics. And I want to reiterate the fact that we want you guys to be involved. We want you to be able to give your input into it, and we'll then try and incorporate more graphics and visualizations that are even more interesting. So, if you like this video, please like it. Please subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below. And yeah, we're really looking forward to having this show on a regular basis. And we want to kind of build this story from Arsenal. And hopefully it's a good one. I'm confident it will be a good one once we get players healthy. But yeah, no, we really hope you enjoyed this, and we will see you soon.